Well, folks, you learn something new every day. When I finally worked up the courage to post in the Protection Discord, I learned that when you post in the side chat where video links are supposed to go, like the moderators say you should, then no one notices and you don't get any feedback. Fortunately, one particular user from the Retribution Discord went above and beyond and gave me the lowdown on what Protection Paladins need. Another burst AoE damage holy ability, on top of their already existing kit. That's what feels like it's missing in the current kit. Shield Glare kind of filled that role, and that's why I added that it basically has a wide cone, and it's unmodified besides that. But I also realized that even better than that would be unpruning Holy Wrath. I remember that in Cataclysm, Holy Wrath was retuned to be a kind of a burst AoE holy damage ability. And it'll hit any kind of target, it's at a fairly short cooldown, and before that, before Cataclysm, in Vanilla through Wrath of the Lich King, Holy Wrath was a 60-second cooldown that damaged the undead, and was about the only Holy Bolt projectile spell in the whole game. I think it was much better after they retooled it in Cataclysm, especially because I got to use it as a Holy Paladin in that expansion, so I unpruned it in my proposal for protection in Iteration 2. You know, I had wanted Holy Wrath to gain back a little of the flavor it had in Vanilla and turn it into a Holy Bolt volley spell. I'm adding these volley spells wherever I think I can get away with adding them, but it turns out I couldn't get away with adding them for Holy Paladins, much to my dismay. Well, screw my personal tastes. I'll do what's better for the game as a whole. I think the current developers have made the mistake, well, one of many mistakes, of putting too much of their personal preferences and tastes ahead of what'll actually be good for the game. And I don't want to make that mistake. I want to do what's good for the game, and giving Holy Wrath to Protection Paladins in this form is what's good for the game. Of course, I used that same Holy Bolts icon that I'd wanted to use for Holy since, well, the vanilla icon for Holy Wrath is already getting used for Exorcism for Retribution, and the Cataclysm icon, that's getting used for Denounce for Holy. And the Mist of Pandaria icon is already being used for the Eye for an Eye Retribution talent. I'm not sure what they thought was wrong with the vanilla Eye for an Eye icon where a hammer is parrying a sword, but whatever, I've got an icon and I will use it. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about what I did for the upgrades. I struggled in Iteration 1 to come up with upgrades for tanks. For healers and DPS, I could do burst versus sustain and or multi-target versus single target. And I knew those wouldn't quite work for tanks, but I didn't think what else I could do. Now I realize I could have damage dealing versus damage mitigation trade-offs for tanks, but that only dawned on me after I got some feedback. I wish I'd known it sooner, but oh well. Shield of the Crusader, Blessing of Light, Eternal Glory, and Fist of the Heavens, to a much lesser extent, are the mitigation ones. Or at least I'm treating self-healing as mitigation, which I don't know whether I should do that or not. Feedback would be appreciated. Sanctification, Shield Glare, and Fist of the Heavens are the damage upgrades. The new vanilla Holy Shield-like effect on Shield of the Crusader was suggested by the feedback that I got. And so was the effect of Blessing of Light. They talked me out of having an Aegis of Light-like effect, as that was taken out for a reason, and suggested turning Blessing of Sacrifice into a straight-up damage mitigation upgrade. So I did just that. It's less than what Blessing of Sacrifice would prevent or transfer, but not by much, and it's flat damage mitigation. I'm well aware that this is the vanilla Blessing of Wisdom icon, and that the Blessing of Light icon was basically the Prayer of Healing icon, but the Blessing of Wisdom icon is just too good not to use. And I settled on the name Blessing of Light because, well, I had wanted to pick a pre-existing blessing name if I could. I wanted to do Blessing of Sanctuary since that was a damage mitigation blessing once upon a time, but there's a Retribution PvP talent by that exact name. Blessing of Light was a heal buffing blessing once, but oh well, I guess the name works pretty well for mitigation too. Sanctification I changed so that instead of planting a beacon on the ground that throws out holy bolts, you buff yourself to throw out holy bolts. That feels different, but the real reason is something that happened to Protection's Mastery that I'd missed in Iteration 1. These days it provides a flat damage mitigation percentage as long as you're standing in your consecration, which in turn means a certain lack of mobility for Paladin tanks, or rather a tax on mitigation for mobile fights. If Sanctification's area of effect follows you around, though, as it does in this version, then you get your mobility back. That's a quality of life change right there. But I've given this speech before, and I'll probably give it again. Probably once a video at the rate I'm going. I worry about providing quality of life through my player power upgrade system concept. I feel like that's a cheap way of making abilities look appealing, by making you spend an upgrade slot to get the quality of life. I mean, maybe it would be better if the baseline Protection Mastery were changed so that the damage mitigation was always on, or heck, rebalance that mitigation into the plus block chance that the Mastery provides now. Make the block chance higher and just eliminate the flat mitigation that Consecration provides. Heck, if Consecration has to play a role and we still want the flat damage mitigation, then maybe modify it so that you gain the % damage reduction if you have stood in your Consecration in the last 10 seconds or so. Each of those ideas might be a better idea for adding quality of life than this version of Sanctification, because each of those is a baseline change that you get automatically, rather than something that requires you to spend an upgrade slot to get the quality of life improvement. Depending on feedback, I might do one of those in Iteration 3 instead of what I've done here. Anyhow, on to one of the more embarrassing parts. I had Light of the Protector as Word of Glory's upgrade, which is what the ability was before they unpruned Holy Power for all 3 specs. But that heals for more based on missing health thing, yeah, for Protection, Word of Glory already had that. And I managed to miss the fact that it did, which is something anyone who had played Protection would know. Oh well, that's still less cringe than my ignorance with Destruction Warlocks. And at least I had a plan B for what to do with Word of Glory. I pulled out my instant cast variation of it, which I had come up with for Holy, which basically applies a heal over time on top of Word of Glory's regular effect. And yes, I totally stole the name and icon from earlier talents. I guess the last thing you'll notice is that I no longer have a back pocket here. That's because I was informed of how useless Objection and Caliga would be. Those are a ranged interrupt and silence effect respectively, and Protection already has Avenger's Shield, or Shield Glare if you take that upgrade. So there's really no need for more interrupts or another silence. So I took those out altogether, and being out of ideas for what to replace Objection with, I decided to slot Speed of Light right in there. Of course, if Terrellian's Might looks like a better fit, then if feedback says so, that's what's going to go in there instead. I think I'd like to sort of go off on a tangent here and talk about one more idea that got suggested to me as part of the feedback. And that was having 1 slot for utility upgrades and then 2 slots for throughput upgrades. That idea has its positive and negative aspects. On the plus side, you can get your utility without having to make a decision in-game that sacrifices throughput to get the utility. On the minus side, it ties my hands about what kinds of things I can and cannot have in the upgrade spread. I'd need to have about 3 utility upgrades and 5 throughput upgrades to make the choices varied enough to feel interesting. Then again, in my earlier drafts, I all too often had too many utility upgrades, so tying myself down to having 3 per spec is a possibility, especially since in most cases, utility upgrades could be shared between specs and be class-wide. But on the other hand, with what I did for Holy's Iteration 2, considering that I had to fulfill about 4 different design goals and took all 7 of the upgrade slots to do it, I'd have to completely rethink Holy's Iteration 2 if there were only 5 throughput upgrades to work with. But if feedback tells me to do so, then I will go in that direction. For now, I'll mix in 1 or 2 utility upgrades amongst the power upgrades. Who knows? If Blizzard actually took this idea, which will probably be ready for patch 11.0 at the rate ongoing, then maybe they'd be able to improve upon the whole concept in the expansion after this comes out, having, say, 3 slots for throughput and 1 for utility. That would take a good thing and make it feel even better, since, again, with a system like that, you get your utility without sacrificing throughput, and on top of that, you get 3 throughput slots, making it kind of feel like you got another upgrade slot. I don't know. Again, feedback would be appreciated.